recording. Good morning to our morning dialogue, screening dialogues that we have every Wednesday. We have Tim Dempsey here from Meridian Township, and we are just here for an open dialogue to be able to get to know Tim. And Tim, you can go ahead and just tell us about yourself and your role and whatever, and you can say whatever you want, and then we can ask questions. It's really just open, so we don't have any kind of agenda or anything with structure and whatever. So go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you. And again, good morning, everyone. So I'm Tim Dempsey, the new township manager. I started at the end of January, so just a little bit over a month now, I guess closer to 2 months maybe. The time flies, but my background, so I worked for the city of East Lansing for 15 years. I was the director of planning, building and development, and then I was also involved as the deputy city manager for about half of my tenure at the city. I left East Lansing in 2019 and I took a role as vice president with Public Sector Consultants. Some of you might be familiar with them. They're a nonpartisan public policy research and consulting firm out of Lansing, about a 70-person firm. They do quite a bit work actually in the sort of environmental space and have for a number of years. So some of you might be familiar with some of their research and some of the other initiatives that they've led for pretty much every administration since their founding. So that was a great experience. I worked with them for about 4 years. I did a short stint back with the city of East Lansing to fill in. They had quite a bit of staff turnover with some leadership changes there, and I filled in for a brief time. And then for the past year, I was up in Saginaw working in economic development for Saginaw Future as a stint, but had the opportunity to take on this role. The board, selected me obviously as their candidate, which I was thrilled to. Having lived in the Lansing area for 20 years, very familiar with the township. Spent a lot of time in the township utilizing some of the great assets, the parks and the trails. The other amenities, obviously, that are available in the community. So I'm glad to be here, glad to work, with the community. From a sort of environmental standpoint, one of the areas that I've worked a lot in, both on the consulting side at PSC, but also during my time in Saginaw and even with East Lansing, has been on solar projects. So I had a big hand in the project when we partnered with Michigan Energy Options to do the community solar project at Bircham and Park Lake. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. That was a former city landfill property, and that was a sort of a great reuse of part of that site. So worked closely with John Kinch and his team on that project, helping to sort of put together all the city agreements that were necessary to make that happen and to advance that project. Also worked in terms of economic development side of things, did a number of one large project with MSU, their solar project that they have with their carports. Before the state implemented the payment in lieu of taxes, the PILT, for solar projects, typically assessors were putting them under, personal property assessments that could then be eligible for Public Act 328 personal property tax abatements. So we did a pretty significant abatement to help that investment, because that was really MSU's first big foray into that arena. So that was something we did to help facilitate it. But interestingly enough, then at PSC, I worked on put together a white paper with the folks for the Michigan Municipal League, the Michigan Townships Association, and Michigan Association of Counties, assessing solar and wind energy and the taxation issues related to that. This was all sort of a predecessor to the state adopting that payment in lieu of tax option for solar, at least. Just this, determining what were some of the impacts, what was happening across the state. And in solar in particular, there was a lot of variation in how assessors were valuing solar projects. So it was creating a lot of uncertainty for investors. And I think the PILT was a reasonable compromise that hopefully is sort of working well. And then in my time at Saginaw Future, I actually worked on 3 large utility grade solar projects. So Chesaning Township with Consumers Energy, Fremont Township with NextEra, or excuse me, that was Richland Township was NextEra Energy. And then Fremont Township was EDP Renewables. So as all of you know, for utility, or may know, utility grade solar projects have the ability to tap into significant state funding for local jurisdictions that approve those. So in Fremont, we worked closely with the township and submitted their application to receive that funding. It's a per megawatt calculation that communities can benefit from, again, for utility grade solar projects. So these are I think all 3 of those proposed projects are well over 1,000 acres each. So pretty massive projects and substantial megawatts. The projects also come with a lot of controversy. So familiar with that, particularly in Chesaning Township, a lot of heated township meetings to sort of, but our role in that as an economic development entity was really trying to help the local jurisdictions just navigate 2 things. One is understanding the tax implications of these projects and what a payment in lieu of taxes would mean. And then the other side of that was just helping them secure that funding that Eagle offers to communities for those projects. So that's just a little bit, sort of on, particularly again, my specific work in the environmental side. So it's been sort of interesting to weave those experiences together and hopefully utilize those to benefit the township as we move forward with, some of our projects. One of the things that we're doing right now is through the congressional directed spending process. So Senator Peters put out his request this year for funding. We're going to be pursuing the solar array for the public safety building here on the township campus to be able to hopefully secure dollars to do if not all of it, a significant portion of that project with, federal grant dollars. So we'll see how that goes. I think given the climate in Washington right now, just generally, it's hard to predict how any of these processes are going to flow here in 2025, but I think that's an interesting prospect and hopefully one that will work out for us. So, but yeah, just a little background there and some of the environmental work, but generally overall, I'm just excited to be here. Working with all the boards, commissions, the committees, trying to learn as much as I can here in a short period. So. To be able to meet all of you and to sit in and hear about what you're talking about is helpful. And yeah, just looking forward to what we can do together. I made it a point to stress during my interviews. Local government is a team effort, and that team isn't just the elected officials and the staff, but it's the community and the community members that provide input and are part of that. So just appreciate everybody's willingness to chip in and contribute to it. So I'll stop right there. That's a lot. I just sort of blew through in a few minutes, but happy to entertain any questions or have follow-up conversation on any of those topics or anything else that you're interested in.
Great, thank you. So I had some help putting a list together of things that this group were all volunteer, well, mostly volunteers, a lot of volunteers. But just very interested people in environmental things, and just some of the things that we've talked about and been engaged in as different teams within the commissions in the township or just in general. Green burial, native plants, invasive plants, the waterways, wetlands, trails, river cleanup and river access, the parks, land preservation, mud lake, brownfields. We've talked about a lot of different things here, and we just come each week and keep finding things to engage with. So go ahead and ask any questions that anybody has for Tim. Thank you, Tim.
Sure.
Hey, Tim, you may or may not have heard that the Township has been involved, still is involved in a study by public sector consultants, your old buddies, who got a grant from the other PSC, the Public Service Commission, to do a community solar feasibility study in a partnership with the Township, City of East Lansing, and City of Lansing. And the feasibility study has been done. It took a while. The energy team hasn't had a chance to kind of digest it yet and kind of figure out what to recommend. From the energy team, whatever recommendation we might come up with would go to the Environmental Commission, who then would have obviously an opportunity to kind of chat about it and figure out what, if anything, to recommend to the township board and staff. But that's something that's in the works now. I'm sure you're familiar with the term community solar, and the whole feasibility study looked at how could you do community solar behind the meter at a municipal building, the municipal building being the kind of host and also the primary user of the electricity. So just wanted to let you know that's coming your way at some point.
Okay, no, I appreciate that and look forward to seeing that. One of the areas that, I'm not that familiar with, and certainly I'm sure they looked at it in the study, is the whole regulatory side, right, of the community solar aspect. The project in East Lansing was relatively small, and I think, the Board of Water and Light was, I think, happy to be a partner. But I also know that our the folks at Consumers and DTE and other parts of the state are, have some resistance to some of these initiatives to some degree. And so I'll be curious to see how they address that. And because that's an area, like I said, I'm not that well versed in, and I know that's a changing dynamic. But one that I think is an important aspect of the whole, behind the meter and then what's being fed to the grid, and that whole interplay is a complex layer of a lot of regulatory, challenges. So look forward to that. Thank you. And I was not aware of it, so I appreciate that, Zoe.
Yeah, well, it's been something in the works for a while, but it's only just recently, once PSC finished the feasibility study, kind of got passed along to the three municipalities. So yeah, Leroy recruited me for the energy team a long time ago, and then I got appointed to the Environmental Commission. So I'm kind of involved in both of those groups.
Okay. Great.
Kind of on that note, I'm starting to scale back at the township, and we are looking for another energy team staff rep. If you have an interest, Tim, we meet once a month. It's a great group. John's been, like I say, a regular member for 17 years or so, and we have several other sort of dynamic individuals that are involved. But if you have an interest in being a staff rep for that energy team, love to have you, especially since I'm less available than I have been. Just throwing it out there.
Sure. No, thanks.
We also have a couple of grants out there. I don't know if you've had a chance to explore those, but we had a CDBG grant that could help pay for some solar, and another grant through the state that where we were hoping to address some of our climate goals. Both are close to $100,000, and they've just been sort of dormant. And I don't know if you've got any updates on that. I have not heard a whole lot from Dan on that. So just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I don't have any current updates on those, unfortunately. So
I'll send a description and copy Dan, and maybe we can just get together on that.
Sure.
So much going on with environmental these days. It's hard to get your arms around it, but that's one of our goals of having the dialogue is to sort of discuss what's on people's minds, what are our priorities, and what are some ways we might move forward together. and you mentioned collaboration. That's knowing what's going on is certainly a part of it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I would expect that as federal and state funding gets tighter, that, when we do pursue funding opportunities, that they're going to really look at the collaborative, projects, the projects that go beyond a single jurisdiction that have a broader impact. Those are the ones that are probably going to be the most competitive going forward, just given the nature of shrinking dollars.
Go ahead, Kim.
Good point.
Excuse me. Hi, this is Kim Peters. I was just wondering, you probably haven't been here long enough, but do you have a general feel or a general idea of a direction you might like to take the township in?
That's a good question. But also a very sort of broad issue, because, this was, again, part of the conversations during the interview process. The vision of the township is really set, by the township board with input, from all of the residents. And, that vision, I think, is one that's crafted, at the grassroots level through, again, groups like this, the Environmental Commission, the Planning Commission, right? All the other boards and commissions that sort of have their policy priorities. And those, hopefully sort of all coalesce into what then the board, will prioritize on an annual basis and then sort of direct funding to. But from my perspective, it's really trying to bring all of that together and focus on what's sort of practical too. Because one of the things that I think we sometimes fall into the trap in local government is that, we have a laundry list of things that we want to do, a wish list. And oftentimes those lists are good and helpful because you'd never know what sort of funding might come up to be able to address them. But the flip side of that is that we're not focused enough, right? That we're trying to do a little bit in so many areas that we don't really do anything very well. So one of the things that, I try to do in working with my teams is to understand, okay, what resources do we have? What are we capable of actually effectuating with those resources, and, what's going to have the greatest impact? And just try to narrow that down and try to figure out, what that is. It doesn't, I don't think, diminish the important work of brainstorming, coming up with ideas, because again, you just never know what funding could be around the corner that might apply, and be able to take advantage of those opportunities. But it is also important to have some level of focus. So again, working with the board, working with the community, I think collectively, that vision gets defined and sort of goes forward. One of the things that I think we'll be talking about with the township board this year is just how they sort of set their priorities for the year. It's been a little bit of a different process in terms of timing that I've seen, and that I think we're going to be talking about this year. And the process has been, they will work on the budget, get it approved, and then later in the year, talk about some of the priorities. And I think we're going to do a process this year where we integrate more of the prioritization overall goals of the board into that budget process, so that it has a better linkage. So the board has a retreat coming up here on a Saturday morning in April. And I think part of that conversation will be the impetus to sort of look at that process and do it a little bit different. So that's a whole lot of sort of words with, not a lot of like really clear, this is exactly the vision that we're going to do. But again, a lot of it is just refining process. Now, in terms of sort of specific priorities, though, I mean, we definitely have some priorities around a number of projects, right? The decisions around the senior and/or community center is right now at the very, top of the list, and the task force just finished its recommendations last night. So that'll go to the board here in April for discussion. There's the ongoing question mark around the Village of Okemos project. and the Hazlet Village project. I'm trying to get those moving forward again. Those are big priorities. So we'll be spending a lot of time and effort to try to advance those forward. As just some of the larger issues. Now, of course, there's the ongoing, right? We want to maintain our public safety. We want to maintain our parks. We want to make progress on some of these green initiatives as well. So that from an operational standpoint, there are definitely some big things here that we need to tackle over the next year or two. So.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed, and this is from the outside looking in, is there are, numerous boards and little projects going on, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of overall cohesiveness between them. Yeah. And there's a lot of great ideas out there, but, at some point somebody has to, kind of prioritize, make a list of, okay, these are all great ideas. This year we can do, 3, 4, whatever number of these things and, put them in some type of order. So, and explain, or at least offer information to the residents so they have a better idea of, what's going on and why they chose to follow this route instead of another.
Yeah. I think your point is right on the mark and goes back to the sort of first part of my response, in that, it's about sort of prioritizing things and really sort of refining, what are the top priorities, and then, communicating that out. I didn't touch on that aspect, but that is important, right? To let residents know, to let other board and commissioner members know what is being worked on, what are those projects, what are those priorities, because it's easy to sort of trip over each other and not realize, what's happening in a certain area. And then, another group saying, hey, we need to address this. Well, guess what? Someone might already be working on some aspect of that. And there should be some coordination. So, part of that too is a capacity and a resource issue as well. It's easy, I think, for us as staff, we get caught up in just the things we have to accomplish to be responsive to our respective boards and commissions, that we sometimes don't always step back or have the time to be able to do that. So I think, again, coming up with processes and ways to do that better is something that we certainly need to work on. And it's certainly not unique to this organization, trust me, right? And I'm sure all of you have experienced similar things in your professional lives, right? Or other volunteer efforts with other organizations. That's usually one of the biggest challenges, right? You've got this big pie of things you want to accomplish, and how do you really squeeze it down into manageable portions?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that feedback and input.
We're going to start a new campaign, Free Tim Dempsey. You need more time, so stop assigning things to Tim and let him achieve his vision. No, I'm partly making fun, but I think part of the challenge, is that everyone is so busy. It's like we don't have time to respond to even opportunities that could be very relevant. So your point about prioritizing and also collaborating is a good one.
Certainly, and sometimes it's hard to to be able to say no, or to sort of communicate that, because one person's priority or one group's priority may not be the others, right? And how do you balance that out and communicate that in a way that people can sort of understand? So.
One of the things about the dialogue is that it is an opportunity to learn about potential areas for collaboration and just things that are going on that might fit with your vision or our vision. We have sort of a unique blend of folks here today. And I just encourage people, if they've got other updates they want to share or comments or questions for Tim, feel free to pipe in, especially if you haven't had a chance to speak yet. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to mute myself.
Yeah, and I'm certainly interested in other feedback, like Kim and John had provided, if there's other thoughts, or, even if it's not related to green, if you have thoughts on what you think are township priorities, just love to hear it. So
this is Roberta. I have a comment and then a question. I live in the Wardcliff area near Park Lake and Grand River, and I walk a lot on Park Lake Road, and I always want to express my appreciation that the snow is removed from the sidewalks. That is really fantastic. And I'm wondering if you can tell us anything about what was recommended regarding the senior center. I know we had a conversation here a while back, and there was some back and forth about whether the recommendation was that it be in the Meridian Mall or a new building be built. Can you tell us anything?
Yeah. Happy to address that. Before I do, though, thanks for the comment about the pathway plowing. So we have close to 90 miles of pathways that we plow. Include some segments are sidewalk, traditional sidewalk, not all paved trails, but together it's a large group. And this winter highlighted the challenges of doing that because we had a little bit more snow and then the ice. And I think all of you may know we don't salt the pathways and sidewalks that we plow because it's just not logistically feasible given the size of equipment that we can use on those and the amount, right? But it's also an environmental issue. We've had a lot of complaints over the years, right? We already put enough salt into the environment with our roads and parking lots. And, if there's one area we can avoid it. Some people wish we would do that, but for those reasons, we don't. So, but thank you for that. I'll pass that along to our public works group. Yeah, in terms of the recommendation, so the task force was asked to provide two recommendations to the board, and one would be a senior center only facility, and one would be a senior center and community center facility. So they've done that. The site that they've landed on is actually currently owned by the township. It's the property that's just east of the central fire station. So right there at Okemos Road, between the post office and the fire station, we have a substantial property there. The township does. So that's the site. The mall site was ruled out largely because of the extensive cost. It would actually be more expensive. Number one, because of the available space was larger than really what's being recommended under both options. But then also other things like common area maintenance charges. So we would have to pay them all $60,000 a year just to help contribute to their what they call the CAM charges, the common area maintenance. So that was an added expense, and the numbers got, north of 80 million when you sort of looked all in over the build out and the operation. So it was way, way too expensive. So they pulled back from that. They did look at some other sites, but land acquisition costs really are prohibitive, I think, right now. So landed back at that site. The two options that they're looking at, the senior center only, is really just trying to mimic essentially what's there today, a little bit larger, not much at all in terms of the facility size, around 15,000 square feet of total space. And then the community center concept would, be a fairly larger option. Both of those, if you want to see what option, where the most recent status of the drawings as of yesterday, if you go to the task force tab on the website for meeting information, you can pull up the drawings that are the conceptual designs, and they're just that, they're conceptual, that lay out those different options. When you look at them, there were sort of two design options they looked at. one was referred to as sort of a boomerang because it has a more of an angled design between the two facilities, and one was more of a traditional sort of rectilinear box sort of shape. But the boomerang sort of design, that's the one that they've sort of decided to go forward in terms of recommendations. So, but you can look at those details online. And then the plan is to have an initial conversation with the board at their April 3rd meeting, and then they'll likely continue discussion at the following meeting past that, and potentially into May as well. So,
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
where they're at. Yeah, happy to share that. So,
Tim, what do you know about the money wise? I know there was a grant. Is it going to have to go to the community to get to cover the rest of it, or what do you know about that part?
yeah, so that'll be part of the conversation around, right? How do you then pay for this? So, what staff has recommended is that, to operate, a facility, particularly if it's a community center and senior center facility, we don't have the current resources to be able to do that. Certainly any new construction would be a debt issuance, so a bond levy would have to be voted on by the voters of the township. And then also potentially an operational one to pair with it to cover, operations that would be above and beyond what we're doing today. Because right now at the senior center, we basically have I think a full-time person and a half-time sort of assistant. And under this scenario, we would at least have to have the half-time brought up to a full-time, and then potentially also a receptionist to manage how the space would be laid out. Under the community center scenario, there would be additional requirements for programming and staff. And then there's just the maintenance aspect of it. So our public works department would be responsible for maintaining, either the smaller facility or the larger, because right now it's in the Okemos Public School facility, right? The Chippewa that's going away, and the school district has maintained that building. We've just operated the program within it. So that's an additional sort of cost factor. So that'll be part of the discussion with the board. They'll have to evaluate that, assess it, determine, what would the total cost ultimately be, and then sort of, reverse engineer that in terms of what it would look like on the debt side for this facility, and then the operational side as well. And then they'd have to certainly make the case to all of you and the other voters in the township, whether that's, a worthwhile endeavor.
If they, I haven't looked at the plans yet, but if they decide to start with the community center, are they looking at ways to add on to that, to bring in other, maybe start with the community center and then build it into start with a senior center, build it into a community center? Is there space, and is there a way to integrate that? Because I think it would be great to have a community space similar to Hannah Center that they have in East Lansing, rather than something solely for seniors. I think it's, speaking as a senior, selfish to designate a space only for seniors. I think that it's important, that they have a space, but I don't think, I just think it's more community minded to think in terms of a community center.
Yeah, and that is certainly one of the themes that the task force talked about throughout. They certainly received feedback, in particular from some of the members of the current senior program, who sort of really argued that, look, all we need the township to do is sort of replicate the space that we have, and we would like it to be separate and stand alone. And that others argued the point that you bring forward, and that's that, well, we really want this to be for the broader community. We see benefit for children, we see benefit for families, right? If it's a true community center. There is the potential to take these designs as they're structured. And if you look at the plans that I mentioned that are online, you'll see there's like a dashed line that separates the senior concept from the community concept. And that notion is that you could do this in phases. You could potentially do a senior center first, and then at some point later, phase on the community center. So it could be an incremental development project, potentially. So that'll be, one of the points of discussion as well, as is that issue that you raised about, community center, its broader benefit versus maybe a narrower benefit as just a senior center.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, this is Bruce Peppers. I guess I'm a little disappointed in their location choice. I think one of the things that was brought up initially when that site was considered was it's a natural site. It's wooded, and adding more impervious surface to my neck of the woods, which is prone to flooding, that would be concerned.
Yeah, and that was discussed last evening as well by the design team. There would be a substantial wetland area that, would have to be, preserved, but also, dealing with those drainage issues, making sure that you have adequate capacity to address any changes there. That's all going to have to be sort of sorted through in the design side of it, to ensure that project, right, doesn't contribute to, any of those issues. And certainly, our experience in working with the Ingham County Drain Commission is that, on projects like this, they, have held developers and the township to, pretty high standards, which, the flip side of that sometimes can be a cost factor, right? That can be pretty expensive to deal with that, but they, have a lot of authority in that space to force those requirements. But in terms of retention ponds and that, if you look at the conceptual design, you can see some of that. And again, we're just at the conceptual level. There's going to have to be a lot of work if the site is the site if township moves forward on this, then we'll have to dig into those specifics in a lot more detail. So,
Tim, with a new building being planned, and I know this is not, wouldn't be a new idea to you. It's a real opportunity to, of course, make it real energy efficient, maybe put solar on the roof, maybe look at geothermal as a long-term heating and cooling option, or maybe air source heat pumps, whatever kind of technology would be more appropriate and kind of economical. But, with public buildings, right, especially one that's going to be around for a long time, we have an opportunity to kind of make an investment kind of with kind of the best technology. Geothermal is not cheap, but then again, it's super efficient, and the building's going to be there for a long time. Of course, the same with solar. Solar would be less expensive if it's kind of built into the new plans. And I kind of assume that, with bonding, not, you're throwing a little extra money into the bond issue, you're able to deal with kind of financing those kind of energy improvements as part of the total package. So I'm sure this idea is not new to you, but I just thought I would, throw it out again.
no, and I appreciate that because it has been discussed. It was discussed last evening, and on the solar side, at least, in terms of what it would take, to do 100% offset for the full facility being both the senior and community center. I think the investment on solar is like 1.4 million. And that's a preliminary. Now there's some challenges because of, it is a largely wooded site. In terms of where those would be placed, likely on the roof versus ground mount kind of scenario, to try to, address that issue. That creates a little bit more expense, but that's an early estimate. And again, if this project moves forward, we're certainly going to be evaluating, solar. The geothermal, I don't know if it's come up in conversation yet. So I've obviously, having just joined the township, haven't been privy to all of the history of the conversations, but certainly as we delve into the design, I think that's one we'll want to raise and look at as well, just to see, what options, what's the relative upfront investment versus that long-term savings, right? Because like you said, it can be very efficient. And the thing that we don't always have a good handle on, other than we know it's going to go up, is that the cost of energy, right? Like everything else, it's not getting any cheaper. So anything you can do to stave off the impact of that uncertain inflationary increase could be a valuable investment. So.
One thing I just want to mention is a green infrastructure audit that Cliff Walls helped us with through Tri-County a couple years ago. And part of his goal was to identify things, barriers that could be removed versus creating more bureaucracy. And just looking at planting suggestions, kind of simple ideas that could be reviewed when you're developing a new property, and removing some of those regulations that might just restrict you, such as tree planting requirements or this many acres of grass as opposed to some alternative or low maintenance landscaping options. So that report is available, and it's served as a model for other communities, and might be something for us to look at again.
Yeah, given the site, there could be some things that we can integrate, preserve some of the features that benefit, versus sort of some of the traditional historic development options of, not being as sensitive to the current landscape, right?
I'll share the link if I can find it.
Okay, thanks.
So as you're saying, other options, Foods for a Living is now available, Rite Aid is now available. So those just get too cost prohibitive because they get to be too much to actually buy them?
It depends. So a Rite Aid scenario would be maybe okay for a senior center, but it wouldn't if you want to do the community center too.
Mm-hmm.
A Foods for Living, obviously a little bit larger. It sort of depends on the nature of the landlord, what the lease terms would be. Are they willing to sell the property versus just lease it? It can get sort of complicated. I think the challenge too is that some of those things, like you get to sort of decision and inflection points where you sort of have to decide either we're going to go in this direction or not. And, as properties sort of come up and available that maybe weren't considered, it's like, how can you now sort of turn on the dime and go back? I don't know if, that would be possible at this point, sort of given the timeframes that have been laid out. It's just, you sort of, again, run up against a timing issue because, as the program sort of has to find a new location, I suppose you could always relocate things on a temporary basis, but that creates some other additional challenges as well. So, and honestly, the one thing I don't have is I don't have the full history of like sort of where all the sites that have been sort of brainstormed and listed out were, but those are just sort of my gut reactions to the two that you raised.
I know another thing that we've had conversation in this dialogue about in terms of the senior center is we at least I did, I'll say I liked the idea of Yonkers. But one of the things that we talked about was the bus access, because not everybody can drive, and just making it accessible for people to be able to get there via bus. I don't know if that's actually on a bus route right now, but just that's, something to be, that I think is important for it to be accessible in that way.
Yeah, certainly. And, we would work with CATA. We have a good relationship with them. I think, given the proximity of their lines nearby, I'm sure we can work something out to make it sort of manageable there. So.
Hi, this is Kim again. I guess there's a lot of quiet people today. But one of the things that, we've talked on and off again in this group is the idea of green burial. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
That's a topic I'll have to be honest with you. I have to do some homework on. I mean, I understand generally what the concept entails, but like I don't know all the other sort of issues around it, right? So I think it's one I sort of need to be brought up to speed on, just in terms of regulatory issues and what are the considerations, who's been doing it, how does it work, how does it function long term, et cetera, et cetera. So I just don't have a lot of background on it to, I think, give you an educated opinion about it.
Okay. One thing that we found in doing research on this is that the cemetery records and, who to contact for the cemeteries at the township, everything there's no central person. It seems to be spread out between a couple of different departments, and it can be difficult to nail down who to talk to get information from. Just to put that out there,
Sure.
Something that the township might want to take a look at.
Okay. Good to know. Yep. I can talk to our public works director about that as a starting point. So I can note myself.
We have a green burial team that's been working on it for a couple of years, and we've had different discussions and different presentations and had different meetings and stuff. And so as we kind of work through the things that we've found, we can share info at some point. But we just have some more questions to find out and that kind of thing. But we've been doing a lot of the legwork to figure things out and understand it from logistics and that kind of thing. So
sure. Yeah, I'd be interested to see what you're learning. And like I said, I don't have a lot of knowledge on it myself yet, but be happy to learn more.
I just wanted to go to our chat window. Amanda's put in there an article. A while ago, we talked to some people on the west side of the state, and they were trying to do green burial and had some issues with their township. There's an article there. And then, as you know, Amanda and I were working on storm drain art. And so the call for artists has gone out. And so that's really exciting. And that will be 17 different drains in the 17 different municipalities in the Tri County. So I'm really excited to see that is happening, and we'll see what happens with the artists for that. Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, thanks for the links. I was checking that out, and want to say, as the resident composter on the site, would love to see more green burials. The science is certainly there. It's certainly a safe thing to do. You just got to find a nice zoned appropriately spot for it. So I long for a site closer by in Michigan here.
Well, and we nicely have Williamstown Township that already has one. They've been working on it for years, and they have that. So we have been able to learn a ton from them. So we are just hoping to be able to bring that to, that's not very far, but bring it as a possibility to our area and even beyond in the region. So yeah, it's exciting.
It is mentioned in the township's most recent master plan as one of the things that the township needs to consider. And in the Green Burial Committee, we are working to put together a short presentation that we plan to bring before the township board. So that'll be an opportunity for you to learn a little bit more at that time too.
I'm just sharing the Green Stormwater Infrastructure report in the chat window, which you wouldn't necessarily know it by the URL. And we can share the chat link later too in the follow-up email. And on a slightly related note, if y'all wouldn't mind just smiling for 2 seconds, I'll take a little picture. Okay, I think just 1 second here. Shoot. I'm sorry, my technology skills. Okay,
You
here
want
we
me to
go.
get it?
Okay, smile one more time. There we go. Thank you. We're good.
Another thing that we have going on, Tim, is that the green team puts together 2 recycling events during the year. One in April and one in September. Our electronics is in September, and a bunch of other things are in April, along with some other green events, and just include bringing together the farmers market with other green events throughout the month. So that's I'm sure you already know about that, but just wanted to bring that to mind of things that we have going on.
Yeah, and those are great events. I know I've taken advantage of similar ones, and every year we're always utilizing those, and they're great assets for the community to be able to bring their stuff, right? And so appreciate that work, because I know those also take a lot of volunteer hours to pull off. So appreciate that effort too.
We have a couple of other groups that have signed up to present on Saturday at the market. Absolute Solar is going to be there. And then also Meridian Conservation Corps is going to be there, and about 5 or 6 other groups. So excited about that on Saturday.
Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, well, I was just going to mention, Tim, that I'm like what Kim mentioned quite a bit from the outside looking in that I don't even live in the township. I'm near East Tawas right now. Retired, but grew up in Meridian Township and worked there for several years in my early life. But the thing that I see about this group, and what you mentioned in the early go here about prioritizing what projects might move forward and so forth, that's going to take some time working with the board and so forth. But I think this group, and people can jump in if I'm talking wrongly, but the idea here is, well, for one thing, we've had a lot of involvement with this climate action plan, which addresses everything. So whatever items move forward, transportation wise, infrastructure wise, buildings, any kind of development, we're really interested in how it's developed, from a green standpoint and sustainability, and this whole idea of a circular economy that we could build in to the community as it goes forward. And what I liked about what you said too is the idea with funding, it's important that we collaborate with others in a more broader base. And I think Amanda's on the line here with Tri-County. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that with, from county-wide perspective, Tri-County-wide perspective, Michigan State University, and of course our neighboring communities. So I'm kind of excited about some of those things you've mentioned, but really want to stress the fact that we would be a resource for how things move forward in a way that is appropriately green for the community.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
And in case you hadn't heard, Sam recently published a book called Mud Lake, which is all about Hazlitt and the region. And love to we're going to learn a little bit more about that this weekend, but happy to share some of those resources because it gives a little context of, you know, the evolution of our community.
Well,
Tim, do you,
go ahead. Go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, ask Tim if he had anything he wanted to ask any of us.
Well, no, just sort of back to my earlier question about just, I was curious about sort of your priorities and what, you know, people thought is sort of top issues or things that you see need to be addressed. So.
Go ahead, Amanda.
I don't know that I have a top issue, but something I wanted to get you guys thinking about, a unique opportunity. I've been working with the Eaton Conservation District. Last year, we held a very successful conservation carnival at a Lugnuts game, and we're going to be doing so again this year on June 1st. And there's an opportunity to both either sponsor and play a video to that audience, or sponsor, you know, how they do like games during the middle of the baseball game to, you know, engage the audience more, or to have a booth. The theme of it is native plants. So I immediately thought of Meridian Township because you guys really seem to consider that in your development and are obviously very focused on it through your conservation corps. So the whole, you could have a table, you could sponsor in a variety of ways, but I think it's a really good opportunity to work with a lot of groups throughout the region on similar goals. And I guess Bendy Stems is going to be providing a free native plant to everyone that comes to the game. And that game usually gets about 4,500 people. So it's pretty good reach.
Maybe Sean will give away free compost samples.
That would be popular.
All you can carry in your pocket.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. Well, we usually stick to 9 to 10, and so we will wrap it up for today, but you know, we may have further questions that we can just email you or whatever, and you're always welcome. Always welcome if you have something, Tim, that you you know, want to have some discussion with us about or whatever. And you know, we may find something else that we want to have a discussion with you about, so we might invite you back. We'll just see, but welcome to the township, and we're sure glad you could be with us today. Any other thoughts to wrap it up for today?
No, just want to thank everybody for the invite. I'll put my I just put my email in the chat box there, so feel free if there's any follow-up questions or thoughts that people have, feel free to reach out. Appreciate it and appreciate the time today.
Great. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks.
Yeah,
so much.
thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
One final comment, unrelated. This Friday's Mid-Biac Brown Bag Lunch will have Michigan Waterway Stewards, Mike Stout as their speaker. So in case anybody's interested in that.
Thanks.